The Iowa caucus season is officially underway because today is the opening day of the Iowa State Fair, the best state fair in the country, unless you live in Minnesota, Wisconsin, or Indiana, because you'll think your state fair is better. But over the next 10 days, Iowans from all 99 counties will flock to Des Moines to pay their respects to the butter cow, sample the latest food items being fried and put on a stick, and hear from just about everyone running for president, except Chris Christie. North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum and former Vice President Mike Pence were on hand for the fair's opening day. Burgum gets the honor of being the first candidate spotted in an apron grilling pork with the governor of Iowa, Kim Reynolds. Former President Donald Trump, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, both will make their Iowa State Fair pilgrimage on Saturday. And joining me now is someone who knows a lot about running in Iowa and running against Donald Trump. It's the former governor of Wisconsin, Republican Scott Walker. He is now the president of the Young Americans Foundation, which is going to be a participant in the first debate, correct?
That's right. Yeah, we're going to be partners.
Students are going to be asking questions. And this is the old Young Americans for Freedom?
Yeah.
Rebranded.
You know, when Muff Buckley started it.
Back when we were in school, they were that Young Americans for Freedom, right? The Reagan wing of the college Republicans.
That's exactly
as one might call it back in the day. Let's talk about this race. Where is it? Is it sometimes I look at it and think we have two primaries. There's the Donald Trump events, and then there's sort of who's going to be the chief alternative to Donald Trump, which is some similarities to your race in 60.
It was 8 years ago. There was a lot of that. In fact, I remember wearing that same apron. You just talking about Doug Burgum. I had a pork chop in one hand, a Leinenkugel in the other hand with Kim Reynolds as well.
That felt like the good old days of Kim. That was the fun stuff.
Oh, yeah, that is good times. Some of the other attacks, not so much. But I think you're right. And it's not just the national part. A lot of times people get consumed in these national polls, the national pairings. But as you know, Chuck, it depends on what are you doing in Iowa, New Hampshire, in our case, South Carolina, Nevada, those early states. That's where it really makes the difference. And in each of those states, you see Tim Scott, for example, picking up some ground in Iowa. You see Chris Christie playing around a little bit in New Hampshire. I think it's wide open in terms of who that alternative is. And really, the best thing...
Do you think voters want an alternative?
Well, you know, one of the polls that came out about a week and a half ago actually showed that a significant number of people who identify as Donald Trump supporters are at least willing to listen to another candidate if someone's elevated through the debate process. It's why I've argued, if I was advising Donald Trump, don't be conventional. Actually come to that first debate, make the case, be commanding. As I saw him firsthand on the stage, I was standing right next to him. He took charge of those debates, and that pretty much will put an end to it. You know,
in June, you and I did a podcast, and it was based off an op-ed you wrote that certainly many of people like me interpreted as some advice to Governor DeSantis. And let me pull an excerpt. Primary voters admired what I did in Wisconsin, but wanted my plans for the U.S. to be as tenacious as they were during my time in office. In retrospect, I should have embraced risk, laid out an aggressive agenda. Without a distinguishing pitch, I blended in with many of the other candidates. The only one who really stood out was Donald Trump. Do you see DeSantis making too many of this, now in hindsight, same mistakes that you may have made?
Totally. The biggest problem is listening to consultants, particularly D.C.-based consultants. You should, dance with the date that you went to the dance with.
Okay.
And I think too often you start listening to people and say, play it safe. In his case and mine, both distinguished records. People love what we did as governors. But that just gets you on the stage. That doesn't win the race for you. And so I think in less than 2 weeks, when he and the others show up in Milwaukee for that first debate, he's got to come out swinging. He's got to show that he's got a bold agenda, that it's not enough to just...
What is his agenda?
Well, that's it.
I mean, that's the... It's funny you say that. I don't know what it is. I know he talks about what he did in Florida, right? And what he wants to do to the swamp and to this or that. But, like, Mike Pence just put out an energy plan. You know, I haven't seen that from
When it's got to nail down not only to a plan, but what are those things? That first debate on, we knew Donald Trump was going to drain the swamp. He was going to build a wall.
One thing.
Whether you agreed or not with any of those things, you knew every person from the primary voter to general election voter. And that's what someone like Governor DeSantis, now, I think he can do it. He obviously was very effective in not only getting elected, but getting reelected in a state that up until recently had been a battleground competitive state. But you got to go past the consultants. You got to loosen up and you got to take some risk. Something I didn't do. And had I done, who knows? Maybe it would have been different.
Right. But is it possible that maybe this is too big a stage for him?
Oh, I mean, I think, between his background in the House of Representatives, having been governor in a state that's effectively like a major, you're talking Texas, California, New York, and Florida. Those are the big states. I think he can step up to it. I think he's proven that as governor. The question is whether or not you're willing to take that risk.
What do you make of so many candidates not taking on the former president with all the political, look, whatever you think of the legal problems he has, whether you think it's politicized or not, it's baggage to swing voters. Why do you think there hasn't been a more effective case against him?
Well, there's two parts to it. So you said swing voters, and then there's primary voters.
Right, and I get that primary voters are in one place.
And to primary voters, it's like attacking a member of the family, even if it's not your favorite member. When an attack is against one of the family members, the rest of the family says, "Hey, we handle this internally. Don't go out to the bar and start complaining to your friends and neighbors." And I think that's really what's happening right now. And even with general election voters, I said this when the indictments, at least the federal indictments, came out. I said there's a risk for the left for that backfiring as well, because one of the things we saw last fall was candidates who spent too much time on the Republican side talking about the last election were the ones left in the wayside. The governors who were up for re-election were talking about the future. They won big. That was where the true red wave was at. The ones who talked about the past didn't. If you're, granted, the indictments aren't being done by the party, but if you're a liberal saying, "Hey, this is going to counter swing voters," a lot of those swing voters are saying, "I want to know, what are you going to do next? What are you going to do about the future?"
Right, but how is a nomination of Donald Trump going to be a campaign about the future? How does the Republican Party avoid a referendum on Trump in the past if he is the standard bearer?
Well, he's going to have to, and I apply what I said in that editorial, not only to Ron DeSantis and the others, but to the president himself. He can't just talk about what he accomplished before, what the problems were before. He's going to have to lay out, what are you going to do about the economy? What are you going to do about bringing inflation down? What are you going to do about helping parents control their children's education? What are you going to do about help keeping cost of college tuition down? Those sorts of things and plenty of others are going to have to be at the forefront of his campaign.
Let me ask you about what happened in Ohio. Because in some ways, the Supreme Court justice race, you believe that was a resource problem, not a messaging problem. I'm hearing the same thing from conservatives in Ohio. Oh, no, it's a resource issue, not a messaging issue. At what point is it a message issue? At what point is it the substance?
Well,
that maybe you have the wrong position.
Well, I mean, look at Mike DeWine. Mike DeWine signed some of the most pro-life laws in the nation, and he won in Ohio last fall by 25 points. 1 million more votes were cast for him than the Democrat running on a very pro-abortion position. So what that tells me is if Republicans are just focused on one issue, they're going to have a bit of a challenge. If you do what not just DeWine, but Kim Reynolds, Ron DeSantis, Greg Abbott, all these other governors who are pro-life did, and run on a full-scale agenda, I think they've got a shot. If it's just one thing...
For the referendum on abortion, you don't win.
Well, at least
right now,
in swing
some of these states,
because the money's not on the side of the pro-life position.
Why is that?
Well, because there's not a financial interest for those. It's a moral issue, but it's not a financial issue.
All right. Scott Walker, there's always a lot more to talk to you about, but I don't have enough time. Good to see you.
Good to be at the Go Packers.
Go Packers.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.